After Succession ended on such a high note, everyone wondered what series creator Jesse Armstrong would do next, and we finally have the answer in Mountainhead, a film that has gotten great reviews from critics, pretty terrible reviews from audiences, and has an awful lot to unpack. So the first project an artist has after a big success is one of the most interesting to me as an audience member, because that's the most creative freedom they're probably ever gonna get. While Succession wasn't the most popular show, it was very well received. It won multiple Emmys, and by the end, Jesse Armstrong was getting up to $1 million an episode. There are very few writers who get paid that kind of money, and HBO wouldn't have been paying him that if they didn't think it was worth it. So you'd fully expect HBO to give him all the time, all the resources to do whatever the hell he wanted next. Which makes Mountainhead as the follow-up really weird. This is a very small-scale movie about a group of billionaires who are on a winter retreat at one of their friends' fancy houses called Mountainhead. And so you see the relationships between these four ultra-rich people as the entire world is in turmoil around them. Now, from the topic, you might be thinking this sounds a lot like Succession, and that's because it is kind of exactly like Succession, even in the way that it's shot. The tone of it, the size of it, the area it's covering, it's all very, very similar. And that really confused me, because I thought, why would someone who's just spent 4 seasons exploring these kind of characters, exploring this world, want to do it again so soon? And that's when I discovered that this is actually Jesse Armstrong's directorial debut, and I think that's the key to understanding this project. See, this project had an insanely quick turnaround. It was written in January, they were filming in March, and it's now out at the start of June. And it turns out the reason for that quick turnaround is because Jesse wanted to direct something, but he was really nervous about directing, and the way to get over his anxiety about it was to make something as quickly as possible. Instead of spending too much time just listening to interviews of other directors or trying to work it all out in his head, he thought better to just go and make something and learn the real way. And surprisingly, he'd never actually directed an episode of Succession before. I would have thought that if he'd had ambitions to direct, he would have done that in his own show, but apparently not. So this was his opportunity to do that. And so when you think about the movie from that context, it starts to make a lot of sense. When he's taking on his first major project as a director, it makes sense that he'd want to work in a world that he already understands, in a style that he already knows. But while in some ways that was probably a massive help to him, in some ways I think it was also a big drawback. It's just impossible not to compare this to Succession because it just looks and feels so similar. Now, this one is focused on tech billionaires, so the angle is a little bit different, but I feel like I've seen more developed, more rounded versions of these characters already before. What was so good about Succession is, yes, it's funny seeing how stupid and out of touch these rich billionaires are, but within all of them, they still had this like tiny little shreds of humanity. They all desperately wanted approval from their dad. They all hated each other, but still kind of loved each other. Mountainhead has all the same kind of satire, and some of the satire is pretty funny, but absolutely none of the depth. It really does try to. AI and deepfakes are a very big part of this movie, and that's obviously very culturally relevant. And I guess the advantage of it being written in such a short period of time is that it is able to be at least a little bit recent in terms of what it's talking about. But I also think focusing on the AI tech bros ends up being a really big mistake. See, Succession obviously focused on a television empire, a media empire, and that sort of stuff still feels like it happens behind closed doors. The people who run the big old school media companies aren't famous in the way that the tech CEOs are. We see and hear from these tech guys constantly. We are seeing Elon Musk at press briefings in the White House. We're seeing Mark Zuckerberg on every podcast going. The way these guys act and talk takes up so much cultural airspace. And so when we see these kind of characters depicted in Mountainhead, it just feels so similar to what we're already seeing in the news every day. The satire doesn't work as well because honestly, truth is stranger than fiction at this point. Now, the big advantage of this project, because it was written, directed, released within 6 months, is that it can be really up to date, it can comment on recent events, but honestly, things are progressing so quickly that it already starts to feel kind of out of date. That's a big problem for a movie that's supposed to be based around this topic. And so what ends up happening is the movie feels like it's trying really hard to comment on something, and then it feels kind of preachy and then just inauthentic. You know, when so much of the movie is like, these AI tech billionaires are stupid, they're using it to advance themselves, and it's also destroying the world in the process, and it's like, I know, I watch the news. For all its faults, there are still aspects of the movie that are really funny. That is the parts where it excels. One of the characters is called Soups. I'm not going to spoil why, but it is an absolutely brilliant gag. But that's not enough to save a movie. So I was really disappointed with this film, but now knowing that this was Jesse's directorial debut, I'm a little bit more sympathetic towards it. By all accounts, directing a feature is incredibly difficult, and the only way to learn how to do something is to do it. Doing a small-scale feature that's going just to HBO, it's not going to go to theaters, is the perfect way to practice the craft. So even though this project really didn't work for me, I can appreciate that this could just be a stepping stone to even greater work in the future.